Hello my friends, I had a package show up today, and what I did is I ordered a Cobblers leather sewing machine, and it's copied after an 1800s machine. I don't have high expectations of this, but it's made in China, so I'm pretty sure the castings are not going to be that good, but you know, a lot of cast iron in there. So I expect that I'm going to have to do a little handwork and maybe some machining to it to get it running. So we're going to just look and see what we have here. There's a lot of weight, so I guess that's why this is all broken, and it looks pretty oily. Okay, right here is the, it's a hand crank sewing machine. So that's the power, elbow grease. Oh, it's very oily too. That's a good thing. We can clean that up with some kerosene. You can see right here some pitting. But looks like it's machined okay. It has 3 legs, which I read online that they're just tubing. Yep. And they're pretty short. So what other people have done is made a wooden base, and this mounts onto a base well. Okay. Sewing thread. Don't know the part, there's no manual. This is a rod that has threads on one end. So it's probably an adjustment for something in here. Oh, it's needles. So there's some English on there. Here's paper. Okay, here's the machine, and well, this was nice. It was tested. There's a piece of leather. It's threaded, so I'm going to have to look at how the threads are on there. And if you can see right there, the test stitching. Okay, here's the machine. I see a bobbin and I see the threads. I'll have to inspect that closely. And they probably do that because when I read problems that people had, is they didn't know how to thread the machine. But so far it was $160 in comparison to buying a higher quality machine for $1,500 to $4,000. So we're going to see how $160 is going to turn out. Here you can see I have it mounted on its stand, and it's a little bit wobbly. It doesn't set level, it leans, it's at a canter. So the stand definitely has to go. The hand wheel, these bearings, the close one rides in here, the upper one rides in the top slot or the outer slot, and you can see there's a keyway. That keyway has a screw, so that screw there is the key for this. So we have to get the key on there. There's a nut that will hold this on. And so there's 3 items that have to be fitted into the proper location before I can put the nut on. Probably going to take another hand. The other thing that I'm noticing is, no, that's okay. I thought it was riding on the one slot. Okay, I have the center slot on. We'll get this nut started. Okay, one bearing's in there, second bearing's in, everything's together. Here's where the threaded rod goes. This is the bobbin holder. And we may need a washer sitting here for the bobbin to sit and not ride or rub onto this, which means I'll need to get another nut or two to lock these on. Maybe a nylon cap nut will secure this so it won't wiggle. Okay, here is the bobbin winder, and it does come and hit the hand crank wheel. And what I did notice is the needle is broken, but they did show some stitches. The stitches look like they're just about a 1/4 inch apart. Here they have 2 bobbins, or possibly a third. And there's 3 bobbins and the bobbin holder, and it's wired on here. So that was good that they included it that way. And it was very smart of them to have this pre-threaded. Here I'm looking at the quality of the weld. And it looks a bit sloppy, and it was ground to make up for sloppy welding. The other thing that I'm looking at is this brazing. Okay, they had to heat up enough when they were brazing. However, what I'm seeing, let me see if I can get a closer view. If you can see right there at that leading edge, there is a gap. The brass should have flowed in there. Maybe more flux in there would have had it to flow better. I can see that as a point that might fail, that may need to be rebrazed. Here I found a broken needle. There's one piece of it. Okay, the thread goes through the bottom hole, closest to me. Comes out through that hole. There, dropped in. Through the plate. Okay, the edges are kind of sharp. The unit's real tipsy, so I'm going to have to get that new base built. And I'm using a smooth file, and I'm knocking off the sharp edges. This screw right here, it's probably okay, but it's high. I'm going to take it down. I've already rounded off this edge here. This just was all sand cast. It was not hit, ground, or fouled. So I cleaned that up already. I'm going to take this screw head down so it's flush with this plate. The plate is the access to the bobbin. I have this filed down. What I was doing is draw filing. That's just with a smooth file, and it's a drawing motion this way. Normal filing is across like that. Draw filing is holding it this way, and it gives you a real smooth finish. I have this real close to being flush, and I'm just going to finish it up with some silicon carbide paper. You want this real smooth. This is where the leather is going to be running across. Now, I wanted to mention this. The needles that were in here that came with this, there's 10 needles in this pack. I inspected these needles, and these needles are not leather needles. They have a needle point. A leather needle will have a chisel point. And what I'm going to do before I test this, I'm going to put a leather needle in the machine. A chisel point will cut through the leather. This is like an awl, a wedge, a tapered wedge, and as it pushes into the leather, it gets tighter. So, sewing leather, you should have a leather needle, which is a chisel point. Overall, I inspected all of the castings. Anything that had a sharp edge, I lightly hit with the file. I can feel a little burr right there. That'll come off with that paper. And it was fairly decent, the way it was taken down. But this could go right to a polish if I would take it through a few finer grits. I'm using a 220 grit. The hole right here is rough edges. It's not symmetrical, and the needle and thread will be riding through there. So I'm going to use a Dremel or tool grinder with a tapered grinding bit to smooth and make that hole round. Here you can see where I sanded, and I went through different grits of sandpaper. I went from 220 to 320, then 400, then 600. And that surface is pretty smooth, so that's pretty acceptable there. And this is the area where the leather will be sliding as it's being sewed. The bobbin, I'm going to work down the same way. I want this surface very smooth where anything might be rubbing. And we'll try to get that to a polish also. Right here you can see the before and after of the bobbin carrier. So I'll polish both of them like that. Here I made a threading tool out of a piece of wire, and what you want to do is start from the needle side, push it up this slot, and it is about a 7-inch length, and you push it up until it comes through the top, and I extend it up here to be able to accept the thread. Push the thread through the eyelet, pull about 8 inches of the thread through the eyelet, then pull the thread down until it comes out through the needle carrier. Here I'm demonstrating how to thread the machine. Okay, you can't see the dark thread, so I'm using this white cord. It's a bit heavier. This would not go through my needle. So the first thing you do is come over to the rocker arm. There's a hole here. You feed it down through that hole. Okay, now these are the tensioning screws. This gives you the resistance. Come down through this wire bar through the washers, up through the bar again. Now you have a second set up here, come from the outside, through the slot, through the tensioning washers, and over that bar. Okay, now you come across to here. There is a ring, looks like a piece of a spring. Come up through that. Now this comes up through the back. Now come through the rocker. And now it goes down through that travel bar that feeds the needle. And that's where I use my threading device to pull the thread down through there. Some modifications and adjustments that I made to the machine. First of all, the stand that came with it was useless. I fabricated a stand, and you can see right here you have to make sure that you leave room to crank that handle. Okay, in the stand I made a storage container. The bobbin winder right here did not work. It wouldn't turn, so I cut a piece of inner tube and stretched it and put it around the cranking wheel. Now it has friction, it's rubber against rubber, it will turn. One thing I noticed when thread is coming off of the spool, sometimes it gets down around the nut, then it stops feeding, it'll break the thread. So I'm thinking that on top of this I should put a small disc that this sits on so that it can't jump down to the spindle. The thread that you have to use, I'm using a Sunbrella, a thread that came with Sunbrella, which is an outdoor thread. It's pretty tough, and we are pushing through a pretty thick piece of leather. And I had read comments on the machine. One individual that did extensive comments on this, he stated that if you can get it underneath the foot, it will sew it. So it pumped through that pretty good, and that was without the leather needle, the chisel point. This was just a spear point or needle point. One thing with the threading that you'll find is this thread has to run down through this tube, which is about 8 or so inches long, and the way to get it through there is you need a thread puller. There's oil ports. There's one here. All the rockers has an oil there, over here, and I put a light grease on any moving parts that were there. The distance of each stitch is determined by how much this foot will move, and that has an adjustment, and that adjustment is right here. This screw, this restricts how much this rod drops, and that is determining how far that will move. And a nice feature is you can rotate the foot to change directions without having to move the workpiece. Here's the first test piece, and it didn't miss a stitch. I did not have a leather needle. I used a standard sewing needle. First test, I was pleased with how it performed. Thanks for watching, my friends. Bye-bye.